Lots of therapy language has crept into everyday conversation over the last few years. In some ways, that's helpful because we've all gained a wider emotional vocabulary. The downside is that people have started diagnosing each other with terms they only half understand. You've probably seen the 60-second how to spot a narcissist reels that pop up on every other feed. Suddenly, everyone has a personality disorder. One of the newer phrases doing the rounds is weaponizing sex. And if you're in a sexless relationship, chances are you've wondered if that's happening to you. In case you don't know, weaponizing sex is when someone deliberately withholds sex to punish, control, or manipulate their partner. The problem is that the term is being thrown around far too loosely. It's often used with no definition, no nuance, and no consideration of the many other reasons someone might withdraw sexually. So, in this video, I'm going to give you a clear explanation of what weaponizing sex actually is, and more importantly, what it isn't. Hi, I'm Laura and I'm a relationship therapist and coach. I help couples create relationships that feel alive and fulfilling. If you're new here, welcome. There's no doubt that weaponizing sex is a serious form of abuse, which is exactly why accusing someone of it is a grave charge that deserves careful thought and balanced consideration. So here we're going to explore 5 different withdrawal patterns to help you determine what's actually happening. My husband has put together this framework to help you follow along, and the full version is on my blog if it's too small on your screen, but I'll explain as we go. There are 5 patterns. 3 are defensive, 2 are abusive. Let's start with the defensive ones because hopefully most of you watching will be dealing with one of these. Number 1, emotional defensive stonewalling. This is a Gottman concept. It describes a defensive emotional shutdown when someone's overwhelmed. They pull away because they feel ashamed, frightened, or flooded. They avoid conversations, go quiet, or look distant, even though they still want resolution. It's harmful, yes, but the intent is self-protection, not punishment. For example, your partner shuts down mid-conversation because the tension is too high. They go quiet or leave, not to punish you, but because they can't cope with the heightened emotional state. Number 2, sexual defensive stonewalling. This is my extension of the Gottman concept applied to the sexual side of a relationship. The mechanism is the same, a defensive shutdown. Someone withdraws sexually because sex feels emotionally or physically unsafe. It can result from hurt, hypervigilance, shame, trauma history, resentment, body issues, or pressure. It looks like rejection, but the motivation is self-protection, not control. To them, it feels like can't, not won't. For example, your partner becomes distant sexually after a difficult period in the relationship. Their body feels tense and on edge, so sex feels impossible until things stabilize. Some of you are dealing with a situation where your partner has withdrawn sexually in the long term and refuses to even discuss it. That's a form of sexual stonewalling I'll cover in next week's video. For now, we need to move on. Number 3, chronic defensive stonewalling. This is a systemic shutdown pattern that develops when both partners feel unsafe or unseen for a long time. It's related to what's known in therapy as the pursue-withdraw or mutual withdrawal dynamic, and it's very common. It's the quiet, eggshell walking, let's not rock the boat kind of relationship I see more than anything else. It can involve 2 good people who are both hurting and withdrawing, and it can go on indefinitely without intervention. For example, one partner withdraws emotionally because the other has withdrawn sexually. This creates an escalating cycle until both sexual and emotional connection have disappeared. None of these first 3 patterns are abuse because the intent is self-protection, not control. Okay, so before we move on to what is abuse, here's a grey area worth noting. Maybe you're stonewalling your partner emotionally or sexually, and you know very well that you're doing it a bit longer than strictly necessary. A sort of fuck you moment, and look, most of us are guilty of this from time to time. The thing is, we make up the next day over coffee and a heartfelt sorry, no long-term damage. This behaviour still sits in the defensive category because the intent to harm is minimal, fleeting, and quickly resolved. We're all human after all. So now we move on to the abusive patterns where intent becomes the defining feature. Number 4, love withdrawal. This is a recognized form of emotional abuse where affection is removed deliberately to punish or control. Emotional warmth becomes conditional. Silence or distance is used to manipulate you, make you feel ashamed, or force you into compliance. There's no interest in resolution because the goal is power, not connection. For example, your partner becomes icy cold for days because you expressed a different opinion. They know walking on eggshells hurts you, and so they create that atmosphere intentionally to make you submit. Number 5, sexual withholding, weaponizing sex. Sexual withholding is an established term that describes the deliberate removal of sex as leverage or punishment. This is what's now being commonly referred to as weaponizing sex. It's the sexual parallel to love withdrawal, where intimacy becomes conditional, something you must earn. The partner knows very well the deprivation hurts, and they use it to influence your behavior or punish you. And to be clear, this is a consistent, ongoing pattern, not a few weeks of withdrawal after a major conflict. As with love withdrawal, there's no interest in repair, introspection, or accountability. For example, your partner withholds sex for weeks or months, refusing every attempt at initiation, and only re-engages temporarily once you apologize for something you didn't do or comply with an imposed condition. We need to be careful with these labels related to abuse because the defining factor is intent, which is incredibly hard to pin down. Even when I'm sitting with a couple every week, it takes time to understand what's really going on. He explains his side, and I might be tempted to think, yeah, she's weaponizing sex. Then she speaks, and I might realize, yeah, I wouldn't want sex in that atmosphere either. The danger is that when you mislabel someone as abusive, the relationship is suddenly considered hopeless, whereas most of the time, these patterns, as painful as they are, often result from fear, overwhelm, trauma, or shame, not malice. So, let's talk briefly about what to do if you recognize yourself in one of the defensive patterns. The stonewalling behaviors we covered first. Most of you watching will fall into these categories, and that's actually good news, because if what's happening isn't intentional punishment by a disordered individual, then you have something to work with. A few simple things make a huge difference. Slow down, regulate your nervous system, intentionally warm the relationship up, keep your own side of the street clean, communicate clearly, commit to regular check-ins, and get help if you feel stuck. I already have videos on all these topics, so look through those for more depth. Now, before we move on, there's one specific scenario I need to address because it comes up constantly. When your partner says, I don't feel like it, or my body, my choice, they're technically correct. No one should have to endure unwanted sex. But in a monogamous relationship, there's an implicit agreement that neither of you will have sex outside the relationship, and so sex is expected to occur within it. Therefore, if your partner doesn't want sex and you can't have it elsewhere, you're being asked to accept involuntary celibacy. That's not abuse, but it is a unilateral change to the relationship dynamic, and presumably not one that you signed up for. Monogamy relies on either sexual connection or, at the very least, open dialogue when that connection isn't possible. So when you bring this up gently, someone who's struggling with sex, for whatever reason, will usually demonstrate care for your feelings. They might not have an immediate solution, but your suffering will matter to them. However, someone who responds to your suffering with cold indifference, dismisses your needs entirely, reframes your pain as coercion, or makes you feel guilty for even talking about it, is telling you that they don't care about you. And whilst that's not weaponizing sex, it's certainly emotional abuse, and that matters. Okay, but what if you've gone through all of this and you genuinely believe you're dealing with someone who weaponizes sex? What then? If you're certain your partner is deliberately withholding sex to punish or control you, and you're certain your behavior isn't contributing to the dynamic, then the response must be different. But be very sure before you come to this conclusion. Make certain there's nothing affecting your partner that you're unaware of, that they're not too frightened or shut down to explain legitimate reasons for their withdrawal, that there isn't something going on between you that's driving this, something you might be contributing to. You have to be absolutely certain this is deliberate control, not self-protection. If you're certain, here's what you need to do. Be completely honest with your partner. This is a nothing to lose situation, a last attempt at repair and an invitation to improve things together. Lay out clearly and calmly what you've been experiencing and why it feels like punishment or control. If you're wrong about this being abuse, your partner may well cite legitimate reasons for withdrawing sexually, reasons you need to hear, and if they do, you need to really listen. But if the response to your honesty is more contempt, more blame, or complete refusal to engage, then you have important information. And know this, you're not being selfish, dramatic, or unreasonable. Sexual deprivation used as punishment is coercive control. It chips away at your confidence, your sense of worth, and eventually your mental health. Recovery is only possible if the person doing it is willing to acknowledge it and take accountability, show consistent effort towards change, and engage in proper therapeutic work. But if the behaviour continues, make no mistake, you're being abused, and your safety and well-being must come first. Look, I very, very rarely suggest breaking up. The truth is that in my experience anyway, this level of deliberate, abusive withholding is rare. Most sexual withdrawal is defensive rather than manipulative, but when it does occur, you need to recognise it for what it is. So how do you know when they're genuinely not going to change? Here are the signs. Number 1, the behaviour is entrenched and attempts to discuss it are met with hostility. If the withholding is intentional and sustained, you're dealing with an entrenched pattern. When you bring it up, the response is blame, contempt, or irritation with no remorse or effort to change. When you try to discuss it gently, you're shut down with, this again, or you're obsessed with sex, or you don't deserve it. This is contempt and it makes progress almost impossible. Number 2, your mental health is deteriorating. If you're constantly anxious, ashamed of your own desire, depressed, struggling to sleep or concentrate, or starting to feel fundamentally unlovable, then your well-being is at stake. You might notice you're not yourself anymore, quieter, less confident, more withdrawn. When the relationship is damaging your mental health, it's time to seriously consider your options. Number 3, your partner refuses all attempts at repair. Someone who won't engage in therapy, won't reflect on their behaviour, won't have calm conversations, and won't make even minimal efforts to improve is telling you they're choosing the status quo. They might dismiss your concerns, avoid the topic entirely, or agree to change but never follow through. You can't work with that. Number 4, the relationship has become structurally unsafe. When you're punished for having needs, when you're walking on eggshells, when affection disappears unless you comply, and when intimacy is tied to obedience, it's no longer a relationship, it's a coercive system. You might find yourself constantly monitoring your words and actions to avoid conflict. If you've reached a point where you no longer recognize your humor, warmth, or confidence, this is a serious sign. Number 5, staying is now more painful than leaving. When the daily emotional cost of staying outweighs the fear of leaving, there's often a quiet sense of calm that follows. Not anger, not drama, just a quiet realization that you can't live like this anymore. You've tried everything you can think of, you've given it time, you've worked on yourself, you've suggested therapy, but nothing has changed. At this point, leaving might well be a self-protective decision. If you're recognizing several of these signs in your relationship, I know how painful and confusing it is, but you need to take it seriously. You need to recognize when your relationship has become harmful. You deserve to feel valued, appreciated, and safe. You deserve to be treated like a human being with legitimate needs and desires. We all do. I know this video's been heavier than my usual content, but I've seen the term weaponizing sex in the comments so often that I felt a responsibility to address it head on. Because mislabeling defensive withdrawal as abuse not only harms your partner, but also destroys the possibility of repairing what might actually be a completely fixable situation. At the same time, I need you to know that weaponizing sex does occur. It is abusive, and if you're on the receiving end of it, the pain, confusion, and impact on your mental health and well-being needs to be taken seriously. Either way, my sincere hope is that this gives you a clearer picture of what's going on for you, whether you're dealing with abuse that requires self-protection or stuck in a dynamic that can be repaired with more effective communication and care. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you found yourself using the term, or has it been used to describe your relationship? Did this framework help you see the situation more clearly? Let me know in the comments. And if you're watching this and realizing you might be the one who's withdrawn, I want you to know something. I regularly hear from people who say, I watched your videos and realized I haven't been looking after my partner. I just didn't understand how important sex was to them. I thought it was all a big deal about nothing, and now I feel terrible. If that's you and you don't know where to start, then please hear this. The realization is itself the start. It doesn't mean you have to immediately start having sex if you're uncomfortable. It all starts, as with most of these complex issues, with a conversation. And if that conversation feels too big to have on your own, you can reach out to me or one of my team using the link in the description, and we'll help you figure out where to begin. If this message felt important to you, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next conversation. I post new videos every week. And if you enjoyed this video, then you might also enjoy this one about restoring sexual intimacy in relationships. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. In the meantime, to yourself and to others, tell the truth.